Hi everybody, today I'll be composing a love theme using the 10 steps I outlined in my previous video. If you haven't seen that one, I recommend watching it first as I talk about how love themes from classical music and Hollywood feature a lot of the same elements, including harmonic, melodic, and structural similarities. Before I start, it goes without saying these 10 steps aren't the only way to write a great love theme, and I'm usually not one for simplifying the creative process in this way. However, I thought it would be interesting to use those 10 steps that I discovered from looking at many different love themes and applying those steps to my own process. Step 1. Tempo. I'll use a slow to medium tempo. Most of the love themes featured very slow tempos, under 60 beats per minute. This was especially true for simple meters, like 4/4 and 3/4, where the quarter note gets the beat value. Some tempos were as high as 76 beats per minute, and this was especially true for the themes with compound meters, like 9/8 or 6/8, where the dotted quarter note gets the beat value. Also, the use of ritardandos, fermatas, and even accelerandos can be used to emphasize the tension and emotion. I'll actually compose two love themes today, one in a simple meter with a slow tempo, and one in a compound meter with a medium tempo. Step 2. Meter or time signature. This is obviously related to the previous step as the meter and tempo go hand in hand. But all of the love themes that I studied had regular meters like 4/4 or 3/4 or 6/8. I didn't find any examples with an irregular time signature like 5/8 or 5/4 or 7/8. Does that mean you couldn't write a successful love theme with an irregular time signature? Of course not, but these are simply guidelines based on what's most common. So sticking with my plan of composing two themes, I'll start one in 4/4, with a fairly slow tempo. For now, I'll stick with a range between 36 and 56 BPM. For the second theme, I'll use a 6/8 time signature with a slightly faster tempo between 56 and 72 beats per minute. Step 3. Most of the love themes that I analyzed were either in major or minor. Two examples, the prelude to Tristan und Isolde and the Scene d'amour from Vertigo, were more chromatic and not necessarily in a major or minor key, but most themes were clearly in one or the other. Themes in a major key often featured extended harmonies like major sevenths, major ninths, 13ths, or chromatic chords, suspending chords, and in particular the half-diminished 7 chord, which incidentally is essentially the same as Wagner's Tristan chord if you're looking at just the notes and not the function. Themes in minor keys can also include extended harmonies, but from what I saw, many of those minor themes featured simpler chords, more triads, both minor and major triads, and a stronger sense of functional harmony, with many themes incorporating half cadences. So naturally, I'll choose one of my themes to be in major and one in minor. In my last video, the minor themes, Across the Stars and the Romeo and Juliet love theme, were both in compound meters, so I'll do the same. For my theme in major, I'll choose D flat major, considering both the Blade Runner theme and the Han Solo and the Princess theme were in D flat major. And for the minor key, I'll choose B minor, the same key as the Romeo and Juliet theme. It doesn't really matter what key you choose, except of course when it comes to the register of instruments. But to be honest, I'll often pick a key initially, perhaps even just the key of C, and then later on transpose it to a key that I think works best. So I'll group steps 4 and 5 together because they're somewhat related. Step 4, the melody typically begins with pickup notes before the first downbeat. That could be just one note or it could be several notes. And step 5, the melody often starts with a large interval. That's usually a fifth or larger in size, but probably no larger than an octave. Often the leap is structurally important within the theme and may return several times throughout. So I'll choose to do both of these things for both the major and minor melodies. I think fifths, sixths, and sevenths work best, so I'll choose a fifth for the major theme. I need to decide what note to start on. Most of the intervals in the examples were ascending, so I'll stick to that. Here are my options. As is so often the case in music, it's best to be thinking about multiple things simultaneously when making decisions. For example, any of these intervals could potentially work, depending perhaps entirely on the downbeat harmony. You don't always need to start the theme with the tonic chord, so you'll want to explore all the different combinations. Here's what I mean by that. I'll look at this interval from D flat to A flat. With these pickup notes, you could of course start the melody on the tonic chord. Maybe you have something like this. I've just quickly filled in a generic melody and a left-hand accompaniment. If you choose to have the first chord be the tonic chord of D flat major, then the melody note on the downbeat is the 5th scale degree in that chord. But you could also reverse these chords and start on the 4 chord, the G flat major chord. I'll keep the same exact melody. Now the first melody note, the A flat, is the second scale degree of that chord. Emphasizing the second scale degree is very common in romantic music, so this might be a great option. You can see how both harmony and melody are sort of symbiotically related. So back to all of these options. Some of these will be easier to navigate than others. For instance, the second one right here is really tricky to make work in D flat major, but not impossible, especially if you're willing to work with more chromatic harmonies, or perhaps jazz harmonies. Here's my attempt. I was sort of channeling Maurice Ravel here. I'm not so sure if it sounds romantic though. So back to all of my options once more. For love themes, I'm drawn to ones where the second note is a major 7th, or 2nd, or even 6th scale degree of the first chord. Let's just say the first chord is D flat major. That means that I'll choose from these. I like to try each one just to hear how that first note sounds against the chord. I think I like that last one. I'll stick with that going forward. Onto my minor theme, I'll try something other than a 5th. How about a 6th interval? Of all the possible 6ths in the key of B minor, I think these are probably the easiest to work with. This one starts on the tonic note B and goes up a minor 6th to G, before resolving down by step to the nearest tonic chord note. The G on the downbeat forms a minor 6th interval against the bass note. The second one here starts on the 3rd scale degree in B minor and ascends a major 6th to the tonic note B. This forms an octave interval above the bass note. And the third option here starts on the 5th scale degree, the F sharp, and ascends a minor 6th to the 3rd scale degree in B minor, the D. This forms a 3rd interval over the bass note. Before I choose one of these, I should try adjusting the number of pickup notes. So far, I've just shown examples with one pickup note before the downbeat, but many of the examples from my last video featured several pickup notes. It's worth exploring the number of notes and the intervals between each note. For instance, I could adjust the first example here and have the first 2 notes be pickups instead of just the first note. Of course, the downbeat interval is now between the F sharp and the B of the bass note, so an interval of a 5th. So I've settled on the following 2 ideas. The first theme in D flat major with an ascending 5th pickup interval to the downbeat, landing on the 2nd scale degree. The second is in B minor with 3 pickup notes outlining the B minor triad, starting with the minor 6th interval. I've chosen to also land on the 2nd scale degree, so that's the C sharp over the B minor chord. In both cases, I'll probably want to consider having the large interval be a part of the melody throughout the theme. On to step 6. This has to do with the melodic phrase structure for the first half of the theme. Typically, not always of course, but often, the melody begins with a 1 to 2 measure basic idea that is based on the opening interval leap. That basic idea is usually then repeated exactly, or repeated and altered slightly through a registral shift or fragmentation. The first half of the melody is usually between 4 and 8 measures in length. Let's start with theme 1. So essentially in this step, I have to decide when and where to repeat the basic idea. Right now, theme 1 is just 1 measure in length. I could immediately repeat the interval leading into measure 2. The question then would be, do I want to repeat the interval from A flat to E flat again? The problem there is that I have the melody go up to F here. I could instead have the E flat go back down to A flat, then repeat the basic idea in measure 2 like this. Even if you change the harmony in measure 2, the melodic shape here isn't very strong. I really think the E flat, which we've established already to be the 2nd scale degree over the chord, needs to resolve before repeating the 5th interval. And anytime you have a large leap like this, you may want to move by step immediately after. This helps create a smoother line, which is what we want in a love theme. So perhaps moving from the E flat to the F is in fact what I wanted all along. Then I could go back down to the low A flat to repeat the opening interval like this. Or instead of eighth notes, I could shift the F to be earlier by a beat to achieve a similar result, but with slower motion. There are of course tons of subtle rhythmic variations you could make to this, including using syncopation. You could even choose to move from E flat to a different note other than F, for instance down to the D flat instead. It's worth trying all of these options before settling on one. Instead of repeating the interval in the original transposition, I could transpose that interval. Since the original interval started in beat 4, I could use the beat 4 F to start a new fifth interval, so from F up to C. A feature of this option is that the contour is ascending quite drastically. That's not necessarily a problem, just something I noticed and I'll keep in mind when continuing. I could also resolve the E flat down to F and then up a fifth from D flat to A flat. The possible advantage with this option is the contour direction is a bit more balanced. Again, I don't think one option is necessarily better than the other. It depends on what you're trying to do. So for each of these options, I can try and expand the first two measures into 4 measures to complete the first half of the melody. With this first one here, my instinct is to transpose those 2 measures up, perhaps by a fourth, something like this. My biggest criticism of these 4 measures is how it jumps around quite a bit and there isn't a smooth contour, or really much stepwise motion at all. If you recall from the previous video, even though a lot of those melodies emphasized important intervals, the majority of the notes were approached by step. Going back to our list of options, let me see if I can take this one and expand it to 4 measures with more stepwise motion. 2 things to consider here. 1, obviously the leap of a fifth, but also the emphasis of the E flat. I chose to leap by fifth to the high A flat, then move stepwise down to that E flat that I've already emphasized a few times. This creates a fairly balanced contour. First we ascend to the A flat, then we descend to the E flat. This concept would also work if we chose to initially transpose the interval from F up to C. The contour is similar to the previous version. The goal is balance or tension and resolution. So going up and then down helps to establish that balance. For all of those 4 measure expansions, I repeated and altered a 1 measure basic idea. It's also common to have a 2 measure basic idea like this. The 2 measure basic idea is outlined in the red box. This idea is then transposed up a fourth, and the end result is a much smoother contour than the previous examples that used 1 measure basic ideas. I won't spend as much time going through the process for my second theme, but the same basic principles apply. Here I've written the first half of the melody, so that's the first 4 measures. The 2 measure basic idea ascends and then comes back down to the original pitch, the F sharp. I've also identified a tension note, the C sharp. It can function similarly to the E flat note in my first theme. Both pitches are the 2nd scale degree in their respective tonic keys, and as we've already seen, notes like the 2nd or 7th scale degree create just enough tension. It sort of straddles that border between consonance and dissonance, so the listener doesn't know if that note has to resolve or not. The next 2 measures start with the same pickup intervals, but then move stepwise down to the A, The note A isn't a part of the B minor triad, so clearly I'm planning on moving away from the tonic chord here. Let's hear how this 4-measure melody sounds. So on to step 7. The second half typically starts with contrasting material that builds in intensity through the phrase and reaches a climax before resolving at the end. This is often where we get a clear contour, perhaps a melody that rises to a high note before falling back down. I'll explore this step more thoroughly using my second theme, the one in B minor. So here is my first attempt at adding 4 more measures. In this version, I wanted to have the second half of the melody reach a high note, and then come back down and register at the end. I also clearly used the leading tone, the raised 7th scale degree right here, which indicates a dominant to tonic cadence. So this second half of the melody is clearly not based on the opening of the first half. It is new material or contrasting material to that opening. But if it's too contrasting, obviously you'll lose the cohesiveness. This can be really tricky. You might try and find 1 or 2 things to relate back to that first half, like perhaps a rhythm or harmony, but you can think of the second half of the melody as an answer or response to the first half. You obviously don't want the answer or response to be the same as the question or the first half, if that makes sense. In some cases, the second half of the melody will actually start the same way as the first half. In those instances, you'll want to find a place to move away from that familiar idea, probably near the beginning or at the latest the middle of that second half, so that the first and second halves are clearly different. Again, you want to find a way to maintain that call and response concept or the question and answer. In this example, I make sure that the second half is significantly different, both rhythmically and in terms of the note choices. The last part of the melody is also much more connected, which helps drive the momentum forward to the end. So the next step deals with how the first and second halves form a cohesive melody. This step obviously can't be considered in isolation, as it's necessary to be thinking about this while working on both the previous 2 steps. But it's a good opportunity to look at the entire melody as a whole and make adjustments where necessary. The most important thing here is that the theme presents a conflict. That could be through the use of interval leaps, or non-chord tones, or suspensions, or perhaps through harmony, rhythms, or even contour. Within the 8 or so measures, however long the melody is, you should then resolve that conflict. I'll return to my first theme. Here is the first half of that melody. Notice the overall ascending contour. You might be wondering, what is the conflict in this first half? Sometimes the conflict isn't obvious, and in this case I think the conflict might have to do with the contour. The line is clearly ascending, so I might consider reversing this contour in the second half. Perhaps something like this. To descend to the original register, I'm using quite a bit of chromaticism. Really, I'm considering steps 7 and 8 simultaneously. Every melody is of course different, but at the end of the day, you're always looking for a balance between the familiar and something new. Step 7 is about making a contrasting second half of the melody, and then step 8 is all about making sure that those first and second halves belong together. In this particular melody, I'm using chromaticism to contrast the second half with the first half, but I'm using similar rhythms to the first half, as well as contour that responds to the first half to link these halves together. You might notice that this particular melody is rhythmically a bit static and could use some ornaments, syncopation, or more eighth notes. I consider it at this point to still be more of an outline, and I want to figure out the harmonies before refining the details of that melody. So that brings us to step 9. I should say, even though I have this as step 9, it doesn't necessarily need to come this late in the process. You could rearrange most of these steps to your liking and still compose a successful love theme. I'll admit I'm always thinking about harmony and melody notes simultaneously, but you don't have to. You can certainly separate these tasks into different steps. I'll jump back to the second theme to discuss harmony. So the only thing for certain at this point is that I wanted this theme to be in B minor. There are many things to consider when adding harmonies underneath the melody. 1. What type of harmonic language to use. This could be classical, jazz, chromatic, really anything, although depending on your melodic choices thus far, some harmonic languages will work better than others. 2. What is the relationship between melody note and harmony note? In other words, are there non-chord tones in the melody? Is the harmony strictly diatonic? 3. What chord should begin the theme? Often this is the tonic chord, but not always. 4. Does the harmonic structure follow the melodic phrase structure? This would depend entirely on the melody, but in this particular theme, the overall phrase structure is sort of a 2-measure basic idea that repeats in measures 3 and 4. The last 4 measures increase in activity towards the end. So if the harmonic structure follows that same pattern, you might have the first 2 measure chords repeat, and then the harmonic pace would pick up during the second half as the melody increases in activity. And lastly, number 5, are there any half diminished 7 chords? Any suspensions, any sharp 4 chords? Those chords tend to be particularly common in love themes. Also, because this theme is in minor, should I end it in a half cadence like many of the examples in the last video? These are all important things to think about. I'll keep this theme fairly diatonic with some extended notes and suspensions throughout. So what's the relationship between the melody notes and harmony notes in this theme? I'll try a few different methods. First, I'll only let the melody notes either be the root, 3rd, or 5th scale degree of the chord, using only diatonic chords in B minor. Assuming just 1 or 2 chords per measure, these are my options. When playing through these, I'll want to pay close attention to the harmonic progression from one chord to the next. Otherwise, my progression will lack continuity and a sense of direction. Keep in mind the phrase structure as well. Remember that these 2 measures are repeated and altered, so you may want to start them with the same chord, but then have measure 4 land on a different chord to reflect the melodic change from measure 2. So with that in mind, here is my first attempt to use only these chords. I'll first play block chords in root position in the left hand. Inverting some of these chords will give me a much smoother progression, so I'll go ahead and do that now. And while I'm at it, I might as well incorporate a half diminished 7 chord. I'll just add the 7th to the C sharp diminished chord. I think this chord in 3rd inversion with the B in the bass will work nicely. So this is starting to sound more like a love theme finally. One of the main features of love themes in both major and minor keys is the frequent use of extended harmonies, including 7ths, 9ths, and added sharp 4s, which could be found in the Bernard Herrmann cue, as well as Wagner's Tristan und Isolde prelude. So if I'm willing to add those types of chords, I could let any of these melody notes be extended harmonic notes. Here are my options then. Not all of these chords work. I left out some of the sharp 4 chords in cases where the melody notes over the chords just wouldn't fit without being extremely chromatic. So now I'll make another attempt at a harmonic progression using the chords from this list. I've also added additional chord changes in the 3rd and 4th measures to improve voice leading. And of course, I'll choose inversions of those chords where necessary to create better voice leading as well. I tried to be fairly subtle with extended harmonies. I still wanted to maintain kind of a classical sound, for lack of a better term, and I think if I were to add more extended harmony notes, I might push the harmonic language closer to jazz, which of course would be fine, but not what I was aiming for here. Okay, so I've got my harmony and my melody, so what's left? Well, step 10 is sort of all about tying up loose ends, as well as adding ornaments, dynamics, articulations, and of course if you're writing for an instrument, be sure to write idiomatically for that instrument. So to demonstrate this last step, I'll return to my first theme. I've made some pretty significant adjustments, including the addition of eighth notes to break up some of these long sustains, and even fill in one of the leaps with stepwise motion. I also moved that first E flat in eighth note earlier. I think all of these subtle adjustments add some character to the theme. I'll now add the left hand accompaniment with chords as well as dynamic markings. Because I'm writing for piano, I've made the left hand somewhat pianistic in texture. You'll notice several similarities to the Han Solo in Princess Q, the key of D flat major of course, but also the use of the pedal D flat in the bass while the rest of the harmony shifts chromatically. So those are my 10 steps to writing a love theme. As I stated earlier, these steps aren't really in a strict order. You might choose to start with harmony, often I do exactly that, or you might start with a contour or a phrase structure. And keep in mind, these steps outline just one statement of the love theme. You might want to think about how subsequent statements of the melody would differ from the first statement. I plan on using this theme for the next episode in my Piano to Orchestra series. I'll look at how to orchestrate this theme in a similar fashion to other love themes that I've looked at in my previous video. So if you enjoyed this video, please click the like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I'll be uploading the MIDI files for both of these themes to my Patreon account. Link is in the description box below. See you next time.